You know, what really pushes someone over the edge? I mean, to that point where love and hate they completely blur, and the only thing left is revenge. It's a scary thought, right? Well, today we're going to look at what happens when some women are driven to that exact point and become killers. Wow. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's a really powerful and honestly pretty unsettling idea. But this isn't just some dramatic quote from a movie. For the women we're talking about today, this was a real core belief, and it ended in murder. So let's try and unpack the psychology behind this chilling sense of entitlement. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll introduce the cases. Then we'll dive into this idea of a thirst for revenge. After that, we'll look at the psychology of control. And finally, we'll cover what happened next, the justice they faced, and a final big question. Let's get into it. All right, first up, when women kill. And you know, the thing that's so haunting about these stories, it's that these women could have been anyone. Your neighbor, a coworker, they were mothers, wives, caretakers, people who on the surface just seemed totally, completely ordinary. So let's meet our four cases. We've got Ruth Ellis, a London club hostess. Then there's Catherine Knight from Australia, and her crime was so horrific, newspapers literally refused to print the details. We have Blanch Taylor Moore, who seemed like this super devout, church-going woman. And finally, a group known as the Angels of Death, nurses who turned a hospital ward into, well, a killing field. Four totally different stories, but they all end in the same place, murder. Okay, now we're diving into our first big theme, a thirst for revenge. And when we talk about revenge in these first two cases, we're not talking about some cold, calculated plot. No way. This is a white-hot, explosive kind of fury, a response to cheating, to abuse, and to this absolutely overwhelming fear of being abandoned. So you can see here we have two really different paths that lead to the same violent end. On one side, you've got Ruth Ellis. For her, the trigger was just brutal. Her lover cheated on her constantly, and then he physically abused her so badly that she lost her unborn child. Then you have Catherine Knight. For her, it was this deep, deep terror of being left alone, something rooted in her psychological condition. Get this. This is a quote from Catherine Knight's first mother-in-law. She told her own son, "If you do the wrong thing by her, she will kill you." I mean, talk about a red flag, right? The signs were all there. She had this history of just exploding over things that seemed minor to other people. But nobody, absolutely nobody, could have imagined how far she would actually go. So Ruth's revenge, it was a public spectacle. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She stood outside a pub, waited for her lover, David Blakey, to walk out. She called his name, and when he turned, she fired. Not once, but twice. Then she walked right up to him as he lay on the ground and just emptied the gun. In front of everybody. She offered no resistance, admitted everything. It was a performance. It was her saying, loud and clear, "You don't get to do this to me." Now with Catherine Knight, to understand her, you really have to understand borderline personality disorder. It's a condition where you get these extreme mood swings, intense paranoia about cheating, but the big one is this profound, overwhelming fear of being abandoned. For someone with BPD, a partner leaving, even just for the night, can feel like a threat to their entire existence. A small argument isn't just an argument, it's total rejection. And that can trigger this desperate, murderous rage, all to stop that person from leaving. And that rage we just talked about, well, it exploded into one of the most brutal crimes in Australian history. She stabbed her fiancé, John Price, 37 times. But even that wasn't enough. The attack just kept escalating. She then skinned and dismembered his body. I mean, the scene was so horrific that the first responders, seasoned police officers, were left traumatized for life. Okay, so we've seen revenge, but that's not the whole story. Not all murders are crimes of passion. For our next two cases, the motivation shifts completely. We're moving away from that hot-blooded rage and into something much colder, much more calculated, the desire for power. This is about murder as the ultimate act of control. Let's look at Blanch Taylor Moore. Her weapon of choice wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a spoonful of food. Think about that. The ultimate symbol of care, twisted into an instrument of death. See, her whole plan relied on her image. She was seen as this loving, deeply religious woman. She'd insist on bringing homemade meals to her partners when they were in the hospital. And then she'd secretly lace that food with arsenic. And she would just watch them suffer this slow, agonizing death that even doctors couldn't figure out at first. It gave her total, absolute power over them. So you have to ask why? What was driving her? Well, one compelling psychological theory is that she was stuck in this awful cycle of trauma from her childhood. Her father was a womanizer who abandoned her. And so with every man she poisoned, she may have been psychologically killing her bad daddy over and over and over again, trying to punish the man who wronged her all those years ago. 38. Just let that number sit there for a second. 38. That is the confirmed number of patients murdered by a group of nurses in a Vienna hospital. And the terrifying part is the real number is probably way higher. They became known, chillingly, as the Angels of Death. So what was their motive? Well, when they were caught, the nurses claimed they were just overworked, frustrated with difficult patients. But profilers, they see a different story. That frustration might have been the spark, but it quickly morphed into this chilling God complex. It wasn't about mercy, it was about power, the thrill of deciding who lives and who dies. And maybe even more than that, it was about the risk, the excitement of getting away with it day after day right under everyone's noses. And their method, it's just uniquely cruel. They would hold a patient down and literally pour water into their lungs. It was a slow drowning that could take up to an hour. And the reason they chose this horrific method? Because the fluid buildup in the lungs looked like symptoms of other common illnesses. It made their murders almost impossible to detect. So, after all this horror, what happens? What does justice look like? That's what we're turning to now, the aftermath, the legal consequences, and some of the really tough questions these cases leave us with. As you can see here, the outcomes were all over the map. Catherine Knight and the Angels of Death got life sentences. Blanch Taylor Moore is still on death row today. But Ruth Ellis, her case had this incredible, lasting legacy. She was the last woman to be executed in Britain, and her story sparked this huge national debate that actually led to the end of capital punishment there and brought in new laws that finally started to recognize the impact of domestic abuse. And this quote about Ruth Ellis, it just gets to the heart of her tragedy, doesn't it? She'd killed the only thing she ever loved, and she wanted to die. Her crime, it wasn't just about pure hate. It came from this desperate, twisted, broken kind of love. By killing her abuser, she felt like she had destroyed her own reason for living. So she admitted everything, fully expecting to be executed, and by all accounts, actually wanting it. And that really brings us to the big, final question, the one that hangs over all of these stories. When you look at these women, what do you see? Do you see cold, calculated monsters? Or do you see deeply broken minds shaped by years of trauma and mental illness? It's a really difficult, uncomfortable question, I know. But it's the one we have to grapple with when we try to figure out where justice should draw the line.